thank you all. First of all, thank you all for being here. I really appreciate that. And thank you for actually deciding. Maybe I should come over here. Thank you for deciding to be on a commission, because it is a commitment. So with what we'll do, where we're going to get started, is our city manager, our interim city manager, Mark Linder, is visiting us on Zoom tonight because he's not able to be here, but he did want to say a few words. So I'm going to, we're going to go to him and let him speak. Mark, or can
All
you?
right, I'm right here. Thank you. Thank you, Rebecca. And yes, I did want to greet all of you and to thank you for taking the time this evening to learn about the roles and responsibilities that you will be taking. I also really appreciate the fact that you are contributing to your community. The work you'll be doing is very important, and the presentations and conversations you'll have this evening are very thoughtful, well put together, and should be helpful to you. So have a good session, and thank you very much for your service to the city of Sonoma. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. And we're going to switch back to our presentation. Go enjoy your evening.
Thank you.
Okay. Here we go. So let's get started. First, again, we just wanted to welcome all of you here. For those of you who haven't met me yet, I'm Rebecca Barr. I'm the city clerk. You've seen my name in your email a lot. Again, thank you all for being here, for serving. I'm just going to do a quick introduction, and this is our city attorney, David Ruderman. He'll be doing the majority of the presentation this evening. Also with us is Monique Savies, who is the management analyst in the clerk's office. So she backs up for council meetings. You've probably seen her name in some of your correspondence, and you will do that over the time period in your term in one of the commissions. So for tonight, sure. So for tonight, we are obviously the city commissions and committees. We're going to talk about meeting fundamentals and parliamentary procedures. And we're also going to talk about the rules we live by. There are a lot. There's not.
He just had it on.
Can you not hear me?
No, this thing should be able to show what's up there.
I wonder if it disconnected when we turned.
We just tried it. Did he leave? Is he there?
I think he left. So, okay, so some of the things that we're going to talk about the Brown Act and some of the other transparency laws. We're going to talk about conflict of interest laws, and we're going to talk about Land Use 101. So, getting started. City of Sonoma, the commissions and committees are super valuable. They're highly valued by staff, by the council, and by the community. So how do the commissions help? What is the role of the commissions? Well, just to start, the commissions as a group, each of you, your commissions will study specific items. For the Planning Commission, it may be more land use items, or the design review. It might be climate action. They're going to be discussing climate effects. There's lots of stuff I know David has on his game and his work plan for the year for the commission. The cultural and fine arts, they're going to be talking about, the artwork, different projects such as the revolving art. So what happens is the commissions are responsible to look at these different projects and then advise the council. And the council takes that advice, and if they decide if they wanted to go forward with it, or if they use that to make their decisions. So it's extremely beneficial, the work that you're doing. So who are we? Who's here tonight? Oops. So we've got members, and I'm going to ask for, if you're a member of the commission, please stand up so we can kind of see who's here tonight. First, we're going to look at the Climate Action Commission. The Climate Action Commission advises the City Council. You can see there's quite a few members here tonight. Excellent. And thank you all for coming. That's great. And we have our, one of our commissions, the Climate Action, has our one youth member so far, which all of the other commissions will be having one join them. So No, actually, you're not a youth member. So, yeah. So the climate action, they advise the city council on issues related to reducing greenhouse gases from the city's municipal, residential, commercial, and industrial sectors and on adapting to climate change. The Cultural and Fine Arts Commission, they develop and establish a balanced arts and cultural program for the city. Oh, sorry, Morgan, Morgan. For the city. Each year, they select and honor the Treasure Artist of the Year. And this year, that treasure artist is Jamie Love, who is a theater director for Sonoma Community Community Center. Thank you. What is wrong with me? It's been a long 3 days. So she, and if you are interested, her reception is on March 30th, and tickets are available on the city's website. It's always a fun event. They also sponsor the Student Creative Artist Award each year. And that is actually going to be sent out, the press release, tomorrow. So people will be able to apply for that, and it's a really great program. And I'm kind of partial to that one because I staff that one. So, but they're all fabulous. Also, design review and historic preservation. So the design review works to protect the architectural heritage. I'm so sorry. I wish this thing was working. I didn't bring my glasses, so I can't read the notes, so my apologies. So design review, welcome. And what they do is that they work to protect the architectural heritage of Sonoma and promote excellence in town design through its review of proposed projects and developments. This is a big one because Sonoma is a very historic city. We have the plaza, we have the Mission. All around the downtown, we have the historic, Depot Park. So they have a very important job, as do you all. Parks, Recreation, and Open Space Commission are, Sinja, if you guys want to stand, I'm remembering, sorry. Oh, nice. Quite a few of you are here too, fabulous. So this is one of our new commissions along with the Climate Action Commission. And they advise the council, their purpose is to advise the council on matters related to the preservation and enhancement of the parks, recreational facilities, open space under the jurisdiction of the city. This group will be having their first meeting next week on the 8th. And I'm looking at our Public Works Director, Mike Berger. He is one of the staff people to the pros. So you'll be seeing a lot of him. And I know he has quite an agenda because I've seen it for you guys starting next week. Next we have Planning Commission. Is there anyone here from the Planning Commission? Oh, Donna, that's right. They prepare, revise, and implement the comprehensive long-term general plan for the physical development of the city and surrounding areas. They conduct hearings and make decisions and/or recommendations on a variety of land use applications. And the Planning Commission is, I think they'll get into a little bit more with Land Use 101, but they're the quasi-judicial. They can actually set policy for the city, a little different than some of the others that are advisory. And they have a lot of work coming in front of them as they do because we're working on our general plan. Just sent our housing element in, and now they're going to be working on the general plan. So the last committee, which is the Traffic Safety Committee, unfortunately right now we don't have a seated committee. I'm going to put a plug in. If you know anyone who is interested in serving on that, we are taking applications right now. The Traffic Safety Committee reviews complaints and suggestions submitted by residents regarding traffic safety issues. It advises the City Council on all physical measures proposed as solutions to those issues. So they have a really important job. And I know some of the individuals that were serving and had served for some time actually were individuals who had some issues in traffic themselves and felt that they would be better served by working on that side rather than in the committee. So again, if you have anyone that you know that would be interested in that, we would love to have them get an application in. And right now, it would probably be a pretty good bet that they would make it on the committee. The other things, perfect. Perfect. Well, they're good. Have them apply. They can apply just like you did through the website. A couple of other commission or things before I turn it over to David to talk about meeting fundamentals. I'm going to put a plug in because we also have openings for the youth commission, the non-voting youth commissioners on all of the commissions except for the climate action. We have a alternate and a regular seat on the CFAC, the Cultural and Fine Arts Commission, that are available, as well as those traffic safety. So if you know anyone, have them put their application in. It will be closing on the 13th of March, 5 p.m. on the 13th of March. So with that, any questions on any of that? Yeah.
How many do you need for the traffic safety?
6 total. We have two, yeah. It's a total of 6 with the alternate
I think we have 2. and one
applications.
position, right? Yeah, so we're halfway there for all 6. Yeah,
Yeah,
quasi.
quasi.
They're not all approved yet.
Yeah. Well, they haven't been considered yet, so.
Yeah.
And what was your, I'm sorry, what?
What's the history of the committee of the commission? And if someone has a traffic safety issue currently, who do they turn to?
Well, I don't know that there is a fundamental difference in the commission and the committee other than the name, and that was how they were named by the city council when they were formed. And as far as if they have a traffic issue now, Mike, contact the Public Works Director at this time, or Public Works. And I believe there is on our website, I believe there is a report an issue where you can do that, and it gets submitted electronically.
Or just call Public Works Director.
Yeah, so,
Another question. I live on the west side, and I was nominated to be on the commission to be representing that side town. On the traffic commission, are you meeting a person over there?
so are you, the differentiation is resident of the city and non-resident of the Sonoma Valley, which is the Sonoma Valley School District. So West Side is that, are you West Side still city resident? Okay, so you have filled the Valley resident. So now only the rest of the individuals have to be city residents. Okay? Anything else before I turn it over?
But that's not necessarily for the traffic safety, though. We don't,
Yeah,
oh,
four.
but she's not on the traffic safety, she's on.
Oh, that's right. No, there isn't. So I'm so sorry. Yes, you could have someone on that committee. Yes. Thank you. I'm tired. Sorry. So just a few household items. Water, cookies are up here. If you didn't get a copy of the PowerPoint, which you probably will need glasses like me to see it. Sorry, it's so small. Restrooms are right outside. Please feel free to go as you need to. And with that, I'll give it over to our city attorney.
Dave, just 1 second.
Oh, no.
Stay right up
Wait,
here.
I'm being usurped.
You can stay right up here with me. Hey, I just wanted to say thank you. And it's an exciting time. I'm the Director of Public Works, Mike Berger. And thank all of you for coming and participating in this. These commissions are very important. And it's a fundamental task that needs to get done. And all you folks are stepping up to get that done. And we can't appreciate it more. So thank you. And then Rebecca, thank you, because Rebecca has been working tirelessly on this to make all this happen, and appreciate it a lot, along with Monique and Dave. So thanks a lot. Thank you. Yeah, and I'll be here tonight when everything's done, if anybody from the pros wants to come and meet me before Wednesday.
Thanks, Mike. All right, my name again is David Ruderman. I'm city attorney with Contino, Highsmith, and Watley. We are the law firm that provides city attorney services for the city of Sonoma. I have like 75 slides to go through, so I'm going to try to go relatively quickly, but I don't want this to be me talking forever. So I welcome questions. We are recording, so if it's a quick question, then I can just repeat the question and answer it. If it's a little longer, then we have mics, and I'd appreciate it if you use the mic. That'll be easier. And yeah, feel free to get up and get cookies while I'm talking. Whatever you guys need to do, go to the restroom. That's fine. And as we go through, if you have questions, I would encourage that dialogue. So the first thing that we wanted to cover is just basic meeting fundamentals. Some of you have probably been into a lot of meetings, and some of you may not have been to a lot. Public agency meetings sort of have a particular rhythm that they follow, and this is sort of how best practices meetings go. So obviously there's going to be a chair, and the chair's job is to essentially oversee the meeting and the process by which the meeting plays out. Generally, I'll go over some of the roles of the chair later. They're generally sort of an impartial person. I mean, they will eventually vote on whatever the item is, but their job is to ensure that everybody has an opportunity to speak and be heard. So the way that we often see this work well is the chair will announce the item. They'll ask staff to provide a report about what the particular item has to do with. This will happen after you've probably already read the agenda packet. So some of it will be repeat. There may be some new information that comes up, a synopsis. Hopefully there will be a little bit of information about what staff is requesting the commission, what action in particular they want them to take. Then the chair will ask if any of the other commissioners have questions. So this is not necessarily the time to start saying, I think this is a great idea, let's do it, I want to go 100%. No, this is the time to get clarification. And, sometimes you may have a particular way that you're going to vote, and so this is maybe a time to ask a question that might show that the way you want to vote is a great idea, because the staff will answer the question in a way that will help your particular point of view. That was very fast. Yeah. At that point, the chair will invite public comment, and we'll go over the rules for public comment. But as you all know, the meetings that you have on your commissions and committees are open and public, and so you always have to provide the public an opportunity to comment. They will allow the public to comment. The general rule is everybody gets 3 minutes, and that can vary somewhat at the discretion of the chair, but the point is that everybody should get the same amount of time. This is not a dialogue with the public. This is an opportunity for the public to make comments after hearing the staff report and after hearing the questions. They can ask questions. You're not necessarily going to get an answer right then. You want to just give everybody a chance to ask their questions. Then close public comment once everybody's had an opportunity to speak. And then the chair would either invite a motion or invite some discussion from the commission itself about what people think about an item or not. At that point, the chair would then invite a motion. Chairs can make the motion, but generally the practice is you want somebody else to make the motion. They will ask for a second, announcing the name of the person who seconded and also made the motion. And after the motion has been made and seconded, the chair should repeat the motion or have the person who's helping, the staff members helping, repeat the motion, perhaps the person who made the motion repeat the motion, so that everybody is clear, so that the public is clear what the motion is, and then there would be the actual vote on the item. So there's discussion. You can have discussion after there's a second. Then you'd get the vote, aye, no, abstain, and then you're supposed to announce what the commission just did. So I think our interim city manager today was saying, in a sense, part of what you're doing is like you're trying to explain to the public what it is that the commission just did, right? So you have to explain, this was the motion, this is who made it, this is who seconded it, and now it has been approved on a 5-0 vote or a 4-1 vote. That's just kind of basic meeting fundamentals 101. When you're in a meeting, obviously, you want to be courteous to everybody. You are, the face of the city of Sonoma. We take pride in the work that we do. We want you to take pride in the work that you do. We want to show the public that we are doing the public's business in an open and transparent and fair manner. So we want to make sure that one person speaks at a time. Part of this is the chair's job. The chair should be recognizing the speaker. You want the discussion to focus on the merits of the issues, right? You're not focusing on the people who are proponents or opponents of those issues. And the chair, because the chair does preside, they do have a right to, if people are out of line, and particularly this is other commissioners, okay? When the public is talking, you give them their 3 minutes. Hopefully they can cut off discussion that's loud. It's become too rude. Oftentimes, the best way to do this is to just take a recess. Say, we're going to take a 5-minute recess. Again, and this is another tip, don't engage in dialogue with the audience back and forth. When there's a public comment, you give them their 3 minutes. They may have a bunch of questions. Right? We can write those questions down, say thank you. We will address those questions after the end of public comment, because it can just turn into a shouting match. You'll get people who are just talking from the floor. Things are being recorded. If someone's out there, yelling, maybe you can hear them, but you really probably can't, and it's not. It doesn't look. It's not professional. Everybody should be reviewing their agendas in advance, so they're prepared to take action, to discuss the matters, and to act intelligently about them. This is an important one. If something comes up when you're reading the agenda and you have a problem with it, or you just don't understand how this came about, give staff a call. You're going to each have a staff member who's associated with your commission. We like to play by the no surprises rule. Staff is going to be able to give you a much better answer if you tell them in advance what your concerns are. It may be something that they didn't think about, and so now they can go back, research it, and they can really get a good, robust response to the question or concern. It's not helpful to staff to be surprised at a meeting. It's not helpful for the city to look like it somehow doesn't know what it's doing, because simply there was something that we should have had a little advanced knowledge about, and we would have been able to take care of it. Okay, so here's the chairperson's responsibilities that I was talking about earlier. Keeping the audience informed, keeping the discussion focused, moving the meeting along, keep track of the progress, protect all the participants. So if somebody is getting, berated, you should ask, that needs to stop. You should ask politely for that person to focus on the issue, not on the personalities, and make sure that everybody's had an opportunity to speak. If sometimes, a commissioner may not have anything to say. Sometimes maybe they're just a little shy. Sometimes you just need to turn to them and say, do you have something to say? And they'll say, yeah, actually, matter of fact, I do. And that's good chairperson responsibilities. It's also seeking consensus. To the extent that you can get a consensus, that's always helpful. And also, again, remaining impartial until actually you have to vote, then that's fine. You can make your vote. These are things that chair people sometimes make mistakes with, and that is failing to find a balance between encouraging discussion and moving the meeting along. So some commissioners will talk as long as they're given the opportunity to talk, and sometimes it's getting late, and everybody has really said everything there is to say about a particular item, and it's time to call for a vote. So that's really the chair's responsibility. It's helpful if the chair can keep track of motions, amended motions. These are all things that are covered in Rosenberg's Rules of Orders, which I believe is something that is provided to the commissioners.
Yeah, they're
Yep.
in your binder.
Perfect. So there's different types of motions, and those are things that you need to keep track of if that comes up. Becoming partial is a problem that we see sometimes. Treating different commissioners differently based on their personalities, based on whether or not you're friends with someone or not. And then member responsibilities. So these are responsibilities of people who aren't the chairperson. You want to help the chair. You want your commission to look good. You need your chair to be work well. So your job is to help the chair. You should ask to be recognized by the chair before speaking, because otherwise you might get people speaking at once. limit your remarks to the issue that's before the commission. We will go over the Brown Act. You really are only allowed to discuss issues that have been agendized. So you need to keep your comments focused. Ask clarifying questions when you don't understand something. Respect your colleagues' rights. Explain your reasoning and raise concerns and objections at the meeting. Once the action is taken, it's difficult to go back and redo things. Other responsibilities, obviously you guys need to review the agenda materials before the meeting so that you're prepared to move forward. If some places like the Planning Commission or Design Review, you may need to visit the location of particular projects before the meeting. You should participate. You applied, you went through this whole process, so you've been selected by, whether it's a particular city council person or the council as a whole to participate and to, yes, you can abstain, but should you abstain if you've been selected so that they can get your input on a particular item? And then this is just, I don't think many of you, maybe Design Review and Planning Commission have worked, I guess there's sometimes study sessions on all of them. Basically, study sessions, you don't need a motion. There's no action necessarily taken on a study session. It's just about getting input from the commission. Yeah, question? Further explain the study session. Study session is basically just an opportunity to get the read of the commission on a particular idea so that it can then come back to the commission with a proposal from staff, for example. So I normally see in this city, have seen study sessions mainly related to development projects. And part of that is to get around limitations on the number of hearings you can have once an application is submitted. And another idea is just so that the developers can get a read for the Planning Commission on what might look good to them in terms of a design or whatever. So they can't make any decisions in a study session, but they can review plans, they can ask questions that might provide a developer, for example, with some insight as to what they would be thinking if there was an application that came down the line. Yes?
We may need in the Climate Commission more study sessions because we have so few public meetings during the year. We have only 4. So I've been thinking about the possibility of study sessions.
Okay, so the question
That's
is
the appropriate time.
study sessions because you have only 4 regular meetings in the year. So a study session can happen at a regular meeting. You can also have special meetings where you have a study session. They're not mutually exclusive. Whoops. Positive norms. So compliment your colleagues, be brief and succinct. As I mentioned before, call staff before the meeting to avoid surprises and avoid personalizing or attacking others with labels. Here's negative norms. So these are things we discourage. Don't vote with your friends, regardless of the merits. There is always a reason to consider other views that you haven't thought of before. Don't get together before the meeting and decide what you're going to do, because that's going to be a violation of the Brown Act. It is not okay to berate staff. Don't be politically reactive. We don't want any particular member to try to dominate the entire commission or have any commission dominated by particular special interests. So here's some traits of successful commissions. You're operating within the overall philosophy, using your independent judgment related to issues, developing work programs and goals, treating the public the way a business would treat its customers. And you are the eyes and ears of the community, so that is a successful commission. Any questions on that before we move to some real legal stuff? All right. All right, so these are now the kind of 4 areas of law that I'm going to cover. The Brown Act, which is our transparency statute, our sunshine law. The Public Records Act, I'm going to just touch on that briefly because it may impact you, although probably less so than it will a council member or certainly with staff. The Political Reform Act, which you all should be familiar with, because that relates to conflict of interest laws. And then I'm going to do a little bit on planning and zoning. Some of the commissions that, that may not be of much concern. I think probably the Arts Commission has the least land use involvement, but it's very interesting information, and the interim city manager thought it would be good to just go over some of it on a high level, because it does affect a lot of stuff that the city does. But before we do that, we want to talk about attendance. So this apparently is the rule in the Sonoma Municipal Code about attendance, and it's hard for me to read. Can you synopsize it with your?
So the way the code reads is that if a member misses 3 consecutive meetings or 1/3 of the meetings of the year, the seat is automatically vacated. It's not a, hey, you've missed 3 meetings, it's just over, it's done. Automatic vacating, no discussion, and it's a vacant seat. If you have something going on and the city council can excuse or make an exception, but it does have to go to the city council. So please be aware of that. And for members of commissions that meet monthly, that's not as much, because you can miss a 1/3 meeting is 4 meetings. But for those commissions who meet 4 times a year, it basically works out to 1.333 meetings. So if you miss 2 meetings, then that's where you're at. So that's just something to be aware of. This is in our municipal code. It's not a staff policy. It's basically a city rule, regulation, law. So.
A special meeting would change that fraction, correct?
I think so. Let me look at the wording of the.
The question is whether a special meeting would change that.
Yeah, it says, if a member of any board or commission of the city fails to attend the regular or special meetings of such a board of commission for 3 consecutive meetings, or 1/3 of any calendar year's meetings. So yes, it would include special meetings. That would change the fraction.
Question, what about those who could overcome that rule by just scheduling 4 special meetings, doubling the number of meetings, and then, close the system? How do you handle that?
Well, you handle that based on the fact that it's not the individual commissioner that's scheduling special meetings. That's a staff decision, so that wouldn't be available.
Can I just add one thing?
Yeah.
On talking about study sessions. Just one thing on that is, a lot of times people will think that a study session is doesn't have to go under the Brown Act, doesn't have to follow all those same rules. It does. It still has to be a scheduled meeting and meet all of those pieces. So it's not like, oh, let's just get together and have a study session and we can just talk freely.
All right. So Brown Act and transparency laws. So the Brown Act is a California law that requires a quorum of the legislative body, such as public commissions, to conduct their meetings in open to the public and with advanced notice. We've given the little definition of quorum here for those who want a brief synopsis of Latin. And there's Mr. Ralph M. Brown. So this is not named after Jerry Brown or Pat Brown. It's named after Ralph M. Brown. It started out as like a 3-page law, and it is now 50 pages. So it just keeps getting more and more complicated. But the general idea is that the Brown Act is meant to facilitate public participation by ensuring that the local government decisions occur in public and open. In a way, it's not that the public gets to be a member of every commission by showing up and speaking. It's that the commission is having its meeting, but it's doing it in front of people, okay? So that's really kind of when I mentioned before that you don't want to engage in a dialogue with the audience, because in a sense, that's not what the Brown Act is asking for. It's just saying, if you're going to meet, you have to make sure that the public can see what you're doing. And that's really the whole point of the Brown Act. And if you have questions about, well, whether or not something is possible, you kind of always have to go back to what the purpose of it was, which was to ensure that the people's business is being done in public. So who does it apply to? Well, it applies to local legislative bodies. So those are city councils, those are our city boards and commissions. They would be standing committees. It does not apply to the state legislature. And then state commissions have their own law, the Bagley-Keene Act. But any local body, like a county board of supervisors, fire district board, school board, they're all subject to the Brown Act. What is not a legislative body? Well, this is there's not a lot of things that aren't legislative bodies, but one thing is an ad hoc advisory committee, so something that can't make decisions, they can only advise, composed solely of less than a quorum of members of the legislative body. So when it says solely, that means you can't have non-members of the legislative body part of your ad hoc that are voting members of the ad hoc, right? So you can't have a staff member join your commission's ad hoc because that staff member is not a member of the legislative body. And when it says less than a quorum, then if you have a 5-member commission, your ad hoc is not a Brown Act body if it's got 2 commissioners. If you've got a 7-member commission, then you can have 3. So it's finite. It's the fact that they really can't have continuing jurisdiction either. So that would be a standing committee. If you have, for example, an ad hoc finance committee that will then report on finances for time, as far in the future as there's finances, which is going to be forever, then you've actually created a standing committee, not an ad hoc committee, because you don't have a finite purpose. Ad hocs usually have one thing that they're supposed to do. Once that they provide a recommendation on that one particular item, they go away. That's a real non-Brown Act ad hoc committee. Questions?
It's important.
Yeah.
And are you going to define the difference between an ad hoc and a subcommittee?
So, there's no difference? Well, it depends. I don't know what you mean by subcommittee. So,
We want to have a tree committee off of the pros committee, and they will have regularly scheduled meetings, I'm assuming.
okay, so if you're talking about the tree committee, which actually is a thing under the municipal code, it is an entity, that's going to be a Brown Act body.
And it's going to be scheduled.
Right. It's going to have a schedule. If it has a formal schedule, then it's basically a Brown Act body. There's private corporations that have to comply with the Brown Act in some cases too. So it's not just local agencies. Question?
I was just wondering, as an alternative, does that mean like I'm on the committee or if somebody bows out?
So the question is, you're an alternate on your committee. So what that means, you need to consider yourself when it comes to applying the Brown Act as a regular committee member. But you won't be voting unless there's somebody else on the commission that isn't there, needs to abstain or whatever. So what is a meeting? A meeting is a term of art in the Brown Act, and it's when you have a majority of members of the commission together at the same time in the same location to hear, discuss, deliberate, or take action within your subject matter. So it's not exactly that clean because you don't have to be at the same time in the same location, which we'll get to. But the point that I want to underscore is that it's hearing, discussing, deliberating. So it's not just taking action. It can actually simply be hearing about something within the subject matter of the jurisdiction, deliberating, so discussing, cogitating, it's all that. Once you have a majority of your commission all deliberating on an item within the subject matter of jurisdiction, you have a meeting, which means you need to follow the noticing rules and you need to follow the rules of having it be open to the public. So yeah, there's a lot of things that become a meeting because of this. So there are these things called serial meetings, which are when you have like you can have two different types of serial meetings. You can have a hub and spoke. Let's see, am I going to get to that? You can have the hub and spoke, and you can have the daisy chain. Oh yeah, I will get to that. So serial meetings is when you're not really in the same place at the same time, but you end up having a meeting. It can happen through email communications. It can happen through text messages. One is a daisy chain, and that's when you have A talks to B, B talks to C, C talks to D, and you've all told one another what you think about a particular topic that's going to come before your commission. So in this case, Bob calls Bill to talk about this resolution, then Bill calls John to talk about it, and finally John calls Fred, and now you've got a majority of the commissioners who have all talked about this particular item, and they've shared their thinking about it such that they all know what one another are thinking about. So you've essentially already predetermined, well, you could probably have predetermined what you're going to do when you end up getting on the dais for the meeting because you've already discussed what you think about it. That's the kind of deliberation that the Brown Act wants to happen in public.
Hasn't that been the history of politics?
So that is the history of politics, and that's why it doesn't apply to state legislature, correct? Question?
I have a question about serial meetings. So if you're meeting with an applicant or a member of the public, and you have a conversation with that person and you express an opinion about a matter that is perhaps on a future agenda of the commission, and that proxy, as it were, conveys your opinion to another commissioner, how is that treated under the Brown Act?
Right, so what you're talking about is really kind of a hub and spoke. So that's where when you have one person who may not be a commissioner, could be a member of the public, who talks to A and talks to B and has, when they talk to A, they find out that A is going to vote in favor of the resolution. Then they talk to B and they tell B, A is going to vote in favor of the resolution. You should vote in favor too. And they say, yeah, I'm going to vote in favor. And then they talk to C and they say the same thing. And now A, B, and C know what each other think about it. That's a violation. How you deal with that with constituents, with members of the public who aren't subject to the Brown Act, is you tell them right out at the outset. You say, listen, this is very important. I really want to hear what you think about it. I want to tell you what I think about it. But I'm subject to the Brown Act, so please refrain from telling me, if you've spoken with any other commissioner, please refrain from telling me what they said about this, because that could potentially be a Brown Act violation. So you just have to get that up front, because they are not going to be aware of that rule. But you certainly are more than, it's great to talk to your constituents about these items, and you probably need to. So.
That seems very important, especially for planning commission, where an applicant is very conflicted in their advocacy for a particular point of view.
Yeah. So this is the hub and spoke. Okay, so what's not a meeting? So individual contacts, like for example, when you're speaking with one particular resident. If you were to go to a conference, like Cal Cities has, I think at the end of the month there's a Planning Commissioners Academy. I don't think we're going to, but we could have a majority of our Planning Commission there. And that's not a Brown Act violation, as long as the commissioners don't sit in a corner and start talking about the next item of business that's going to be coming before them. Same with community meetings. So an open and public community meeting, so maybe a meeting that the chamber's putting on. You see this with candidates nights. Those, you can get a majority of your commission can go to those because they're open, they're public. You can engage in the discussion according to the agenda. Again, you can't just go back in the corner and talk to the majority of your commission. Meetings of another legislative body. So you guys can all come to the city council meeting, and you can come up and you can speak at public comment, and you can speak on each item of the agenda, and that's totally fine because that's an open and public meeting. You're engaged in the meeting that's been agendized. You're just not going back out there and talking about commission business later. And this also applies to social ceremonial occasions, especially in a small town. You might there might be 3 of you that end up at a wedding or something like that. That's going to happen. Just don't talk about commission business. Public participation is also,
Just
yeah.
before you go on,
Question.
I wanted to raise a theme that is of concern. It's clear that this precludes commissioners talking about items that have been agendized, items that are coming up for a vote, but in the development,
in the development of issues where we're not at all sure what's coming toward a vote. We're a long way from an articulated motion in a meeting. To have only 2 of 5 able to discuss these topics is extraordinarily restrictive of the development of effective public policy. And there is no doubt that at the moment this is affecting deeply the work of the Climate Action Commission. So is there any flexibility to talk about themes, issues, without getting into Brown Act violations, other than the 2 ad hocs, the 2 members of an ad hoc? Without getting into Brown Act problems. These are very early discussions of, for example, automobile greenhouse gas emissions. That affects all of us on the commission, and issues will be coming up. There are 2 members of an ad hoc transportation committee, but the other 3, under a strict ruling here, can't have a single word with them about automobile traffic transportation. Is that really what Brown Act says, to be that strict well before an agendized item?
I think you just have to apply a rule of reason in those types of situations. When it comes to how formulated does an idea have to be before it's an item that's within the jurisdiction of your particular commission. But yes, the Brown Act is incredibly restrictive to this type of deliberation. I think a lot of local officials recognize that. But it is also something that lots of members of the community find extremely valuable. And in the end, it's a legislative decision that our legislatures in Sacramento made. But I think generally you're going to need to just apply a rule of reason, because in the end, that's how it is. And the other thing, and
Say
the thing
a
you have
little
to think
more about a
about,
rule of reason, Dave, in terms of this kind of thing. Those are cute words. Where do they take us in terms of discussing with someone who's not on our ad hoc these broad themes that will be coming up in specific, but at the moment they're simply in a very generic, how the hell do we control tourist-based greenhouse gas emissions from vehicles? How do we deal with employees who can't afford to live here, so they drive in? These are the kind of themes that will be very much on our
Yeah.
plate, but they're nowhere near specifics at the moment, and we're totally walled off from discussing by a strict rule of the Brown Act.
you need to, those are all items that you could discuss in a Brown Act meeting regarding, ideas for dealing with those topics.
Right, and you have only 4 in an entire year.
So, there's two aspects, and I'll get to this later, but the first aspect is the courts, because they're the ones in the end that will adjudicate Brown Act violations. And the second is is the court of public opinion, because that is one of the most salient areas where the Brown Act is enforced, which is in the media and in the local blogs.
Just real quick,
Just a second.
I'll give you the mic in a minute. The Leo Bukowski, isn't it because it's agendized or not? Isn't that one way to do it? If it was agendized, then we know for sure that we can't do it.
Absolutely.
If a member of the board or the commission mentions the idea that they want to agendize it, I think that would also be a gray zone that might count. So this agendizing, I think, or the intent to agendize more things.
Well,
It'd
what
be
I
nice
meant
to have
was
a
what I meant to say was, if you just put it on an agenda and speak about it, then you've solved the problem. But what you're saying is that if you don't ever mention that this is something that's going to be on the agenda, or is it somehow outside the realm of the Brown Act? And that I can't give you an answer.
What I was thinking was that members of the board or the commission want to agendize something, and they're going to agendize something, and they made motions to agendize something. I think that would.
Well, yeah, I agree. If they did that,
That's
then
it.
any discussion about that would have to happen in an open and public meeting.
This is just another maybe way to ask the question. How does a commission brainstorm? How do we come up with ideas with a free form, way of just talking about potential ways to address whatever the charter is of our commission?
Let me see if I can give you some practical advice. Generally, the real brainstorming has to happen at a noticed and public meeting. So the way that you want to get that on the agenda is you want to talk to the chair and to the staff member who's in charge, in particular the staff member, and explain to them what your ideas are and what you think the commission needs to think about putting on the agenda. That staff member is going to be able to determine, because they're not subject to the Brown Act, and they're also skilled, and they're not going to start acting as the hub in a hub and spoke and telling everybody what everyone else is saying. But they'll receive all this information from all the commissioners, and they will be able to determine what there is a critical mass to discuss, and whether or not there's overlap such that they could agendize that as something that would take that would deal with the concerns. And the other thing is, you can have so that would be that's my main takeaway. I guess the other option would be to talk to the chair, but you just have to be mindful of the fact that you would just be telling the chair, this is something that I think we should put on an agenda to talk about.
Okay. And I'm shifting gears a little bit into just the Brown Act itself. And we've been under an emergency. COVID, right? And that's changed the way the Brown Act is enforced, and it's enabled remote meetings.
Yeah.
Right? We can do this on Zoom.
We can't do this on Zoom anymore.
Well, now we've been told, except for the interim city manager.
Well, he's not a commission member.
Right. But the point is that now we're reverting, right, to having to be in person. It's really, in my opinion, pretty restrictive, and it reduces access for people being on commissions, and and it's kind of an issue.
I think that's something that you can talk to.
There's been a
Mark McGuire about
SB 411, which has been proposed by, I think the guy's name is Postatino, I think.
Yeah, that's for appointed boards, but yeah, that would
commissions,
apply to
that'd
you
be
guys.
us,
Yeah.
right? So I just
Don't hold
wondered-
your breath. But
That's what I was going to ask,
yeah.
whether you had any insight about that at all.
I think it sounds like a great bill, and it's something that I don't see why they wouldn't adopt, but it's going to take a while. So.
Just to amplify on that piece of legislation, I sit on a county board, and I was given a draft template letter to send to our elected officials in the legislature to advocate for that, because the issues have definitely come up at the county level as well.
All right, let me move on because we have a lot more to cover. Public participation, you guys need to make sure that the public is allowed to criticize the work that you're doing, the work that the city is doing. That is all within the scope of the Brown Act. It's about a marketplace of ideas. The public has the right to attend meetings, and they have these additional rights. You can't put any conditions on the public attendance. Often, for example, they ask for people's names and addresses at public meetings. You can ask people for that, but you can't compel them to give that. People do have the right to provide anonymous public comment. You have to allow people to video and audio record you. I mean, we kind of now just submit to that normally, but there was a time when that was unusual. And if somebody does come in with their own video recording device, you have to let them do it unless it disrupts the meeting, unless they're, on the dais, trying to get on the dais in your face. And they're also allowed to broadcast. And we also have to ensure that all meetings take place at ADA accessible locations that do not discriminate based on any protected classification. We also have to make sure that our agendas, so for a regular meeting, they are posted 72 hours in advance. There has to be a brief description of each item of business that's going to be discussed. I think it's like 20 words or less. And the idea here is someone needs to be able to look at the agenda and determine whether or not they want to get out of their warm house and drive all the way down to attend the meeting. Now, sometimes they can appear by Zoom, but this law was written before that, and this is the idea of the amount of notice that needs to be in the agenda. You can only talk about items that are on the agenda. You can only really take action if something's been agendized for an action. Again, that's so that people know, well, are they actually going to be voting on this resolution tonight, or are they just having a study session? In which case, maybe I do care before they vote. I at least want to say my piece. But if they're just talking about it and there's not going to be any action, then maybe I won't say anything. So that has to be on the agenda. Before each item of business is concluded, you have to provide public comment on each item. You also need to allow for general public comment at any regular meeting, and that general public comment doesn't have to be limited to agendized items. It does still need to be limited to the jurisdiction of your particular commission. So technically, if somebody came in to your commission and wanted to talk about, the plight of the Uyghurs in China, you actually could say that, that's outside of, unfortunately, our jurisdiction of our design review commission, for example. Now, so the public will come up and they will talk about things that aren't on the agenda. Well, what do? Well, you are allowed to provide a brief response to public comment that's not related to an agendized item. Normally, you would refer it to staff for follow-up later, or you would just thank them for their presentation and say that you look into it or something. There are some special rules about that, but I doubt you guys are going to have to deal with urgency items or emergencies. I really hope you don't have to deal with any of that stuff. Because of the issues related to serial meetings, you often see issues come up with emails. As I mentioned, emails can become a daisy chain, become a hub and spoke. Same with text messages. We also have seen a rise in well, not here, but general legislative body members texting while they're in a meeting on the dais. That is not a good idea for a number of reasons. Now, obviously, if somebody's having a medical emergency at home, you need to respond to that. That's totally fine. But when you are having what is essentially a private conversation that's not accessible to the public, you are violating the Brown Act, because your meeting is supposed to be public, and yet you're having a private conversation about a particular topic, or at least it will look that way to the people in the galley. And public perception is a huge part of the Brown Act. Again, it can risk serial meetings. There are due process concerns, which would relate really to design review or the planning commission. Those texts could be public records, and what you're texting about if the Index Tribune wants to see that text message, they may be able to do that if it's about city business. So don't forget about that. A couple years ago, the legislature adopted AB 992, which relates to social media use in the Brown Act. And it applies to any open and accessible internet platform. And it says a couple things. The first thing it says is, yes, use social media to get input from people, from the public, about things that you guys are working on. You can ask questions to the public, ask for, comments. You can tell the public what you think about an idea. That's great. So post on social media about commission business. That's fine. That's not a Brown Act violation. However, another commissioner cannot respond directly to any post that's made, posted, or shared by another member. So we interpret that to include liking a comment or using little emojis to respond. And this is an unusual rule because now the legislature is telling us it's not 3 people that matters, it's 2 when you're on social media. That is a Brown Act violation. If you are just responding to one other commissioner's comments about, a particular issue related to climate change or something like that. So it's something you need to be cognizant of. The idea, again, is that they don't want, they really just don't want deliberation on items of public business happening outside of a noticed public meeting. There are provisions that allow commissions to go into closed session, which means where no public is allowed. There are very specific reasons when this is allowed. It's somewhat unlikely that a lot of your commissions will need to do that. That's normally something like City Council does. It's really personnel, labor negotiations, litigations, but it's something that it's worth knowing about. Consequences for Brown Act violations. So there are criminal. It is possible to violate the law criminally. You have to have the intent to deprive public of information about which the member knows or has reason to know the public is entitled to. That's a misdemeanor that would be prosecuted by the district attorney. There's also civil lawsuits. This is what I haven't seen any criminal Brown Act cases in my 10 years of doing public agency work. But there have been some civil, I have seen civil lawsuits, so this is when just a member of the public believes that there was a Brown Act violation. They do have to provide a cease and desist letter first, allow the agency to cure whatever potential problem there was. But there are consequences. However, probably the most serious consequences that I see regularly is this breakdown in community relations due to mistrust and secrecy, damage of reputation, and lack of confidence in the democratic process. It's sort of the New York Times test, right? Do you want whatever it is that you just did to be on the headline on the next Index Tribune? All right. Let's see how much we learned so far. All right, we have a little test now. So we've got a city commission with 5 people: Ann, Betty, Charlie, Dan, and Edith. Okay. Oh man, how come oh well. It was supposed to come up like one thing at a time, I don't know. It must have gotten erased by my metadata scrubber or something. All right, so Ann calls Betty to urge her to vote yes on the proposed new tech center, and then Betty runs into Charlie at the grocery store and tries to sell him on the tech center idea, but Charlie's not buying it. Is that a Brown Act violation? Anyone? Yes?
Yes.
Why would it be a Brown Act violation?
Well, Ann and Betty doesn't constitute a quorum.
Ann and Betty doesn't constitute a quorum. Right. But now Betty went and talked to Charlie.
But Betty didn't say anything about Ann.
Right. We don't know what Betty, this doesn't tell us what Betty said. I think the answer is maybe. It's clear that Betty knows that Ann wants to vote yes. And it's clear that Betty knows that Charlie doesn't want to vote yes. Presumably Betty knows what she's going to vote, how she's going to vote. But you still only have one person who knows what two other people are thinking. We don't know if Betty told Anne how she was going to vote, and we don't know if, well, we do know that Charlie told Betty. So it's possible, but it doesn't sound like it. Charlie then calls Dan and tells him to vote no on the tech center, but no one contacts Edith. What about that?
I think David's guilty.
I'm not even on there.
Which David?
Oh, so, you know, Charlie calls Dan to tell him to vote no. So we don't know exactly what if Dan told Charlie anything. And we don't know if Charlie told Dan what Betty told him. And we don't know if he ever learned about what Anne said. If not, then that's probably okay, because there's not three people who have all know what each other is thinking. But you're getting pretty close at this point, right? Because it looks like you're getting into the daisy chain.
Who would be guilty of the violation?
So at this point, let's say it would be Betty and Charlie. Yeah, Betty and Charlie, because they would know what Anne and Charlie and Betty, and then potentially Dan knows. So now Anne emails Edith asking for the tech center, and Edith says, okay, I'll support it. Now Anne forwards the original email and Betty's reply, that was from the previous one, to Charlie asking for his support. So Anne forwards the original email to Edith, and I think that's supposed to be Edith's reply. Yeah, that's a mistake. Edith's reply to Charlie. So Charlie now knows what presumably, what Anne thinks and what Edith think. So is that a violation? Yeah, Charlie now knows what two other people think.
What's the violation?
Yeah.
So wouldn't the simple solution be to conduct all of this at the meeting, not absent the meeting?
Yes, so the simple solution is conduct those at the meeting. That is correct. So what should Charlie do? He should probably first of all, he should say, please don't email me other people's emails, and then he should talk to the staff member that's assigned to your commission, who will then maybe talk to me. Not because I want to get anybody in trouble, but because I want to make sure that the city is as safe as it can be. So here's the hub and spoke. So we have our citizen who's lobbying Anne to vote yes on the tech center, and then that same person lobbies Betty, and then that same later lobbies Charlie. Is that a violation? That probably not, unless that citizen told each and every one of those people what the other person, what the other commissioners had been thinking about the tech center.
How best is it for a commissioner to be able to introduce a proposal? Do you go to staff first?
How best to introduce a proposal for the commission to consider?
Yes.
Yeah, you should talk to staff first.
So staff is your safety.
Yes, staff, the Brown Act doesn't apply to staff, and staff is educated in the Brown Act, so they know how not to violate it.
Staff?
Can you conspire with staff? I guess you probably could, yeah.
No,
Conspiracy takes two people, so.
what does staff do then next?
Well, staff is going to take that input into account, and they're going to look at, what people are thinking, and they're going to talk to their chair about what they have bandwidth for and what's going to work for the next agenda, and they're going to come up with an agenda.
Get back to you?
Staff is probably not obligated to get back to you, no.
No.
But, they should be in touch.
So it would go to the chair, and then what would happen?
Well, then they have to formulate the agenda. So it's really going to be up to the staff member and the chair to make the agendas. So if you want your input in terms of agenda preparation. No one commissioner can compel something to be on the agenda, but you can let people know, let the staff member know what you're interested in.
Let people know?
Let the staff member know. You can let other people know as long as it's not two of your other commissioners. All right, so during public comment at a commission meeting, Edith asked staff for an explanation of the city's process for approving an update to the city's zoning map. This wasn't on the agenda, but staff then starts discussing and it turns into a 26-minute presentation. Does that sound like a problem? It is maybe an annoying problem. No, the problem here is that you've just had a deliberation on an item that's not on the agenda. This is not simply a brief response to a public's comment or simply a commissioner report about the meetings that you've attended since the last time you met. That's probably a violation because it wasn't agendized. Ann sends an email to Betty seeking support for the tech center. Betty doesn't reply or forward it because now she's learned her lesson. Ann then sends another email to Charlie seeking support for the tech center, but Charlie doesn't reply to Ann. However, he forwards Ann's email to Dan with a comment that Ann is out of control and needs Brown Act training. Is that a violation? That's a tough one. I mean, Ann obviously is out of control, but Betty did the right thing. Now, Charlie knows what Ann's thinking, but, and Dan does too, but Dan doesn't necessarily know what Charlie's thinking, and Charlie doesn't know what Dan's thinking, other than that Ann's out of control. I think that's not a violation. That sounds okay. Yeah. Okay, are any of these items public records? Yes, they are. And that's even if they're using their Yahoo accounts, because they're talking about city business. So, conclusion with the Brown Act, it's complicated in details, but the general rule is simple, and that is do the public's business in public. Give the public notice and an opportunity to participate. When in doubt, ask Mike Berger for help. If you're on the pros committee. Right, so public records, a record is really anything, any written thing that the city has custody or control over. It includes electronic writings, it includes videos, audio, emails, and since the case that came out of San Jose, it does apply to city business that's done on personal devices. So technically, it's it's not something that Rebecca has access to, but it is because because your private email is being used for city business. It is a public record, and in those cases, we normally ask commissioners to search their private emails and then certify whether or not they had anything responsive or not. So. Really, the point of this is to provide you with these recommendations. First of all, don't create unhelpful records. If you are dealing with items of the commission business, it's great to copy staff on those. You actually may get emails that are sent by the public just to the commission members. Forward those to staff. Staff needs to have a copy of anything that's provided to a majority of your commission. Don't retain records unless you have a reason to retain them. Segregate your exempt from your non-exempt. That means really you don't have to worry about that because that's about whether or not it's something that's exempt from the Public Records Act request, which would mean that we could withhold it. But do segregate your personal from your public. So did these guys get did they get a city email address with their commission? Only Planning Commission, okay. So you may want to consider having a separate email account for your commission business, in which case you need to update all that with Rebecca.
Even though we, as the city, have your email addresses, we don't publicize those on the website. They're your personal ones. Someone may reach out to us and ask for it, And if you have an issue with someone having your email, please let me know. Typically, I will reach out to you and say, hey, this individual is looking for your email address. But in this day and age, they're pretty out there. So just be aware of that. Yeah, but the planning commissioners do have advertised email addresses, but they're city email addresses.
All right. I'm moving on from the Brown Act. Yeah. Yeah.
So if a PRA request or a public records request comes in for something for one of your commissions, typically we see it with planning commissioners or city council members. There have been times when we've received them for the other commissioners. It'll be myself or Monique that reaches out to you. Please be as responsive to that as you can, because there is we have a
10-day.
legislated timeline that we are required to meet. We have to respond to that individual within 10 days. So they don't like when we send them back and say, we don't have the records because somebody didn't respond to me. It doesn't work that way. So please be aware of that. Be as responsive as you can. Most of the time you'll say, Rebecca, Monique, I don't have any records. I don't have anything. And then we're going to send you a document that you sign that says, I did a search of my records and I don't have anything. So
It's the New York Times test again, and probably most of you know this, and if you don't, it's good information. Before you send your email, think, do I want this email to be printed in the New York Times? That's the question.
or your social media comment.
Correct. All right, conflict of interest laws. Another area where the state legislature has imposed a number of requirements. The three main areas of conflict of interest laws that apply to local government officials are Government Code Section 1090, which relates specifically to contracts, the Political Reform Act, which relates to financial interests generally, and then the common law, as well as due process. So the common law is the judge-made law that sort of fills in the gaps where the statutes haven't quite gotten to. Government Code 1090 likely to be of less importance to you guys because you won't be entering into contracts in your position as a commissioner, but it's worth knowing about. Essentially, it codifies the rule that you can't be on both sides of you can't essentially contract with yourself, in the sense that you're personally on one side of the contract and you as a city council member are on the other side of the contract, agreeing to contract as the city with your private company. It goes much broader than that. It does apply to indirect interests in contracts, and it is rather severe. And it will actually prevent the city from entering into the contract. And if you do try to enter into the contract in violation of 1090, the contract is void and unenforceable. Actually, any benefits have to be returned. And it doesn't even matter if the contract is like a great deal for the city and it's a terrible deal for you personally. This kind of just gives you a sense for where it comes into play. There are a number of exemptions that are in the statute. They're called remote interests or non-interests. And in those cases, you actually could contract with yourself or with indirectly with yourself. And then there are other exceptions, rule of necessity being one. Basically, the idea here I want to impart on you is that if for some reason in your capacity as commissioner, there's something that's coming before you where you have some type of indirect contractual interest, you should let staff know, because we could have a 1090 issue. The situations where it might come up, there's probably an exception, is like, for example, if you're on the board of a nonprofit and the city's entering into a contract with that nonprofit, is that going to be a conflict under 1090? Potentially, but maybe not, because there are rules that would say, in some cases, that's a remote interest. So Political Reform Act is something that you may have to deal with more, and you probably have already dealt with it in the fact that you have filled out your and filed your Form 700, assuming office statement with Rebecca.
I was going to bring that up. There are some of you that have not completed those yet. The only commission that is not required to do so is the Parks and Recreation Commission. No, not the Parks and Recreation, the Cultural and Fine Arts Commission. Tomorrow is the deadline, and unfortunately, there are no, it's
There's
okay
no
to be late.
extensions.
There's no extensions. So if you, for some reason, have not received that information, you should have received it via email. So if not, talk to me, and we will get that. We'll find out why not.
Yeah, so you can get fined if you file your Form 700 late, but better late than never. Form 700, it's a statement of economic interests.
See, I thought I filled mine out.
Some of you have.
Oh, okay,
Some of
good.
them, I'm not saying everybody hasn't, but there are some individuals who have not.
How do you find out if it's?
If you think you don't know if you did or not, let me know, and I will, well, tomorrow, it's not a good day because I'm not going to be here. We will find out, and for those of you who have not filed by tomorrow, if you haven't heard anything about it, raise your hand. So,
She will take down your names. She's taking names.
I think I filed, but I don't remember.
but you saw it.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, if you did it, you will have your receipt of filing. You should have gotten an email from NetFile. It comes from NetFile on behalf of me. It comes from NetFile from NetFile on behalf of me. It gives you the information of what it is, the link of how to go into it to file it. Some of you filed paper filings, and for this time, we will accept that, but in the future, it is required that you file electronically, so just going forward. Search under net for NetFile, NETFILE. No, you would have gotten it mid-February. And it may have went to your spam. So talk to me afterwards, and I will send you the link. It's fairly straightforward unless you have a lot of investments or a lot of property that you own within the jurisdiction. Then it gets a little more complicated. But it walks you through it. The first time you do it electronically, next year you go in to do it again, and your information's there. It just asks you if anything's changed. So, but if you haven't gotten it, or if you know, let me know and I'll check.
Question?
Rebecca, in the instructions that are in the binder you gave us, it says that the assuming office statements are usually 30 days from the date of the commissioner sworn in. And it really, it's the date that you said in that file is the date that we're going to be held to.
It's the date you're appointed. It's not the date, so if it says it's the date you're appointed, so your appointment date was February 1. And I apologize that that got in there, someone else prepared those binders, so. Yep.
So you have to file your Form 700 because what you're supposed to do is disclose what are the financial interests that you have that would be the basis for a conflict, so that you recuse yourself and you do not take part in the deliberation, the discussion, the action on the item in which you have a financial interest. Form 700s are public, but that means you don't have to write down your home address on there, even though your home, if you own it, or have a more than a month-to-month lease, is a property interest that would constitute a conflict. Question?
Do you have to include something that isn't a conflict? For example, a business, a personal business that isn't a conflict?
Do you have to include something that isn't a conflict? Well, if you own a business, then that's a financial interest that you have, and if it does business within the city, then you need to include it. It may not constitute a conflict with respect to a particular decision, but who knows, it could down the line if there happened to be something that was going to affect your business that the city was going to do. Question? If you don't own it and you don't even rent it, then you don't have to disclose it, and I guess the question then would be, do you receive a gift of free rent? In which case, the person who does pay for the home would be the source of income to you. And that person, if there was a decision that would affect that person, that would mean that you had a conflict with respect to that decision. So the idea here is that you are not allowed to participate in making or in any way influence a decision that relates to something in which you have a financial interest. So it's not just voting, it's actually trying to affect the decision. There are particular interests that the Political Reform Act identifies that can be the basis for a conflict. Personal finances of yourself and your immediate family meaning spouse or minor child, dependent child. A business entity in which you have an investment of $2,000 or more. Real property that's worth $2,000 or more. A person or business that is a source of income to you that aggregates more than $500 in the last 12 months. So for me, that's the law firm where I work. They are a source of income, and I therefore disclose them on my Form 700, and they fortunately pay me more than $500 in the last 12 months. And then any business entity in which you are a director, officer, partner, trustee, employee, or management. And then the last one is people who are the source of gifts to you. And gifts has a particular meaning under the Political Reform Act. It's not just any gift. But if it does aggregate more than $500 in the last 12 months, that could be also a source of income. 590, yeah. What did I say? Oh, it's 590. Yeah. It does say 590. It's very small.
Dave, if you are your spouse.
Your spouse, we live in a community property state, so half of what your spouse makes is yours.
I was gonna ask about this.
Yeah.
So, but separate property does not have to be listed. I don't have any interest in that. That's hers.
Well, if you are if you're positive that it's not community property because it, for example, she owned it before you entered into the marriage, then that's right.
Okay, just want to make sure.
Yeah.
Because otherwise it would be very confusing.
Yeah.
Okay.
But you do only have to report half of what is, like, for example, I have to write down my spouse's income, but, there's like they have like income thresholds, but I just say, well, what was half of how much she made last year, and I enter in that amount, so.
That's helpful, thank you.
Oh, whoops. So the idea is about, it is broad, so it does apply to attempting or to influence a governmental decisions, which I mentioned earlier. So if you do have a conflict, and you may see this from time to time at the Planning Commission or the Council, and it could arise for you guys as well, even though you haven't been involved up to the point of the meeting because you knew you had a conflict, so you haven't been trying to influence the decision or anything beforehand in any of your discussions with one other person on your commission, when it does get time for a meeting, at the beginning of that item, before the staff presentation, you will announce that you have a conflict of interest, and you will provide enough information so that it's understandable why you are recusing yourself. So you can't just say, oh, sorry, I have a conflict and therefore I'm recusing myself. You have to say, I have a conflict because I have a business interest that is affected by this decision, or I have a conflict because I own real property that's within 500 feet of this decision. And then you get down off the dais, you actually leave the room, and you don't come back until after the item has concluded. There is some exceptions, so if there's something on the consent calendar, which is basically sort of things, like a number of things that you vote on with one motion, you actually don't have to leave for that, and that's just for so that the meeting can move expeditiously. You do still have to announce that you have the conflict, and you have to instruct the staff that it be recorded on the minutes that you are not participating with respect to, consent calendar item 3 or whatever. So that's making sure the record reflects this. So this is one reason why you should review the minutes from last meeting to make sure that it was properly identified that you did not vote on a particular item, because that's going to be your evidence that you properly recused yourself if the FPPC ever comes knocking. Question?
So I'm curious how much judgment goes into the determination whether you have a conflict or not. I have a ownership stake perhaps in an electric car company, or a car company that may someday make electric cars. And electric vehicle chargers come before the commission. Is this a area where I need to?
So, there are a lot of rules about this. The FPPC has promulgated copious numbers of regulations which change over time, and it's sort of a lawyer's full employment act. So what I want you guys to know about are the red flags. If you identify, this is a red flag, and that's an appropriate red flag to flag. You don't necessarily have to go figure out right now. I mean, you can. Some people could go out into the regs and just read them and figure out what the rule is. But you really just want to talk to staff and alert them to this. It may be very easy, and we'll be able to tell you right away it's not a problem for X, Y, and Z reasons. But it could be. It is, however, your individual responsibility, and you do individually have the potential liability for voting on something if you have a conflict. So it's something that matters to the city because it can upset the validity of the vote on something. But you could also get fined, right? So it's in all of our interest for you to identify those red flags and to talk to us. What happened?
No, it just went black. Did you?
There it is.
I wasn't moving fast enough. I know. Common law bias. So we did. This is the third of the different areas. Really, this is about using your official position for private benefit. You're not allowed to do that. You can have your own opinions, but the other idea here is due process. So that's the idea that people are entitled to an impartial decision maker. That really is only going to apply to the Planning Commission and maybe some design review if you're issuing permits, for example. When you issue a permit, you're essentially acting like a judge. And so judges are supposed to be impartial. People who are seeking permits have a due process right to have an impartial decision maker. So that's just something that's worth noting. So if you do have a conflict, what do? Okay, city attorney, actually talk to your staff member first, and then they can talk to us because Mark Linder doesn't want to see a bunch of bills from us about us contacting all the individual commissioners. That will not make him happy. It will not make Mark Berger happy. As I said, you do have an individual stake in this. You can talk to your own attorney. The FEPC has a phone number. They're actually really helpful. They're really helpful with filling out your Form 700s. You can call them up, and they'll give you an answer probably pretty fast if it's not too complicated. In more tricky situations, we can even ask we can write a letter to the FPPC if it's really something sticky and get an advice from them.
I will share that, yes, you can call. The hours of the phone call line are fairly limited, so advice at fppc.ca.gov is a much better, quicker route to go normally.
Email them now?
Yes, it's advice at fppc.ca.gov, I think is the address.
Any questions about conflicts? We're almost done. And I'm just over 7:30. Okay. Land Use 101. I have my Woody Guthrie quote. Because, as they taught us in law school, property rights is like a bundle of sticks, right? And You can have some pieces of that bundle, and not all of them. No such thing as absolute property rights in this country. So, this is mainly something that applies to the Planning Commission. Design review also. The Planning Commission works as an appointed body of the council. They obviously comply with the Brown Act. There are due process provisions that apply to them. That's constitutional due process. It's sort of the foundation of how government can deprive people of some of those sticks in their bundle. And there are a number of practical considerations that have to be dealt with. Land use law has a variety of sources. It starts with the California Constitution with the grant of police power to cities and municipalities. It is also affected by the Takings Clause in the U.S. Constitution and the California Constitution that requires the government to compensate people if their property is taken for a public purpose. The state legislature has also passed the Planning and Zoning Law, which governs how cities are zoned for different types of land uses. The Subdivision Map Act, also a creature of state law, which governs the creation of parcels of real property, the division of real property. The California Environmental Quality Act, which requires local agencies to consider the environmental impacts of discretionary decisions they make before they make those decisions. And then local law. So the city of Sonoma itself has its own general plan, could have specific plans, has its municipal code. So those all apply to how we govern the use of land in the city. So the police power is where it all starts. So that's Article 11, Section 7. So counties and cities can make and enforce within their limits all local police, sanitary, and other ordinances and regulations not in conflict with general laws. And general laws are the laws in the government code, essentially, the state government code. So this is a very broad grant of power. The police power sounds like it has a lot of, it can do a lot, and it can. It is the basis for our ability to tell people what types of uses they can perform on their land in what areas. And it's augmented by the planning and zoning law. When it comes to our local land use regulations, we have the general plan, and I'll talk about that in more depth in a second. You can have specific plans, which are one step down from that. I don't think we have any specific plans in Sonoma. But they do, obviously, in the county. The Springs has a specific plans, as you guys are probably all aware. So the zoning ordinance itself, which is, I think, Title 19 in Sonoma Municipal Code, and then you can also have development agreements, which are actually agreements with one particular developer, and that is technically considered legislation. Variances, use permits, so these are when you are actually dealing with particular property owners and the way that they use their property. The zoning ordinance covers when you can grant a variance or issue a use permit. There are uniform fire and building codes, which are promulgated by the state and then adopted by local jurisdictions, and those can be adopted with amendments, which ours does have. And then there are special city-specific ordinances. So we have historic preservation ordinances. We've got ordinances that relate to hillside development, et cetera, and policy statements that the planning director can also adopt. So in terms of local land use, the general plan is sort of, it's sometimes referred to as the city's constitution. It has 7 mandatory elements, and this is required by state law. The state requires that we have a general plan. It's sort of a long-term policy document about where the city wants to go and what sort of values it wants to embody within these 7 different elements. So the elements are housing, land use, circulation, which is like traffic and stuff, conservation, open space, noise, and safety. There's no hierarchy amongst these elements. They're all sort of equal. Definitely housing and land use get the most scrutiny. And as you may know, because we just recently were in the process, we have adopted substantially compliant housing element, and we're waiting for certification of that. So that one has to get updated on a more frequent basis than your general plan. Generally, you also have optional elements: air quality, historic preservation, agriculture, community design, etc. So these are optional. So that's up to the council in the end whether or not to include those. And really, it guides development. Everything that the city does needs to be consistent with its general plan. And so everything that you guys are going to be doing really needs to be consistent with the general plan. General plan consistency is required by state law, and it involves both horizontal consistency and vertical consistency. So all the elements within the general plan need to be consistent with one another. And then everything that the city does in terms of its zoning ordinances also has to be consistent with the general plan. The general plans, as a result, are written in a way that allow quite a bit of flexibility, okay? They're not a statute where you are going to be able to interpret them precisely one way or the other. They're really more broad statements of policy, and I think that's one reason why they call them a constitution, is because, was it James Marshall's, comment in Marbury versus Madison, this is a constitution, we're propounding here. It's not a statute, it's something bigger than that. And it has a lot more room to find stuff in between there, between the lines. We don't have specific plans, but specific plans are an option. They're sort of a midpoint between a general plan and a zoning ordinances. They can be plan-like. The Springs specific plan is a good example, I think. Zoning ordinances, this is obviously something more applicable to us. So this divides the community into particular uses, okay? So in Sonoma, we've got residentially zoned property, we've got commercially zoned property, we've got mixed-use zoning, and then we have some special overlay zones, open space, creek setback, historic plaza, retail. Other cities have other types of zoning also. So you'll see different types of industrial zoning, for example, which we don't necessarily have. And then whether or not a particular development can take place on that parcel depends on whether or not it fits within what's in the zoning ordinance. Zoning ordinances are normally written in a way that makes them basically nothing is allowed in the city unless the zoning ordinance says it's allowed. So if the zoning ordinance is silent as to a particular use, that means that use is not allowed. And when there's a question in a gray area, then you talk to the planning director about what does the zoning ordinance actually say. Zoning code approvals. So this is the distinction that I've made a few times when it came to is the commission acting like a judge or is the commission acting like a legislature passing laws? When you're acting like a legislature, that means you're setting codes of conduct that will apply going forward. And when you're acting as a judge, you're taking existing law and you're applying it to a particular party. When you're acting like a legislature, due process, constitutional due process, doesn't apply, because constitutional due process applies when you are potentially depriving somebody of property or of liberty, or of, in California, the dignity interest. And so the Planning Commission and the Design Review, when they're dealing with permits, or they're dealing with whether or not someone can get a variance from the setback requirements because of the oddities of their particular parcel. You're applying set rules to a particular person, so you're acting like a judge. Due process applies. You need to be an impartial decision maker. Sometimes it's not always it's not intuitive always what's when you're acting like a judge and when you're acting like a legislature. So specific plans, development agreements, which are essentially contracts, are considered to be legislative, as are zoning code amendments. But variances, use permits, and other types of sign permits and stuff are quasi-judicial in nature. Findings are a very important part of land use law because findings explain to the public and to a court, in the event that it goes that far, why a commission has actually done something. It's supposed to provide the nexus or the link between the facts as the commission found them and the decision that they made. And this mainly applies in those areas when you're acting like a judge, right? Because you want to explain why the law in this particular area applies this way to these particular facts. So yeah, it's for the benefit of the applicant, the opponent, the public, facilitates judicial review, and creates a guidepost for future decisions. It's always important to do this and necessary in quasi-judicial situations, but sometimes it's simply required by statute or by our local ordinance. So sometimes the MAP Act or CEQA will require findings, even if we're acting more like a legislature. And also our local ordinance. I mean, like I do believe our ordinance requires findings for general plan amendments, which are legislative. So the way this usually happens is the staff comes up with the findings and they present them to the commission. The commission needs to make those findings their own. So if they totally disagree with them, they should ask them to be changed. If there's little changes that can be made, sometimes those can be made right there at the meeting. If they're more substantial, then they need to go back. Sometimes staff tries to like anticipate, obviously staff wants, if staff has a recommendation, they're going to prepare findings for that recommendation. Sometimes staff don't really care and they'll prepare two separate sets of findings. But sometimes they'll just prepare one, and then if you end up deciding differently, they'll have to go back and redo all the findings. Yeah, so you can, if you want 15, 54040, you've got use permits. So these are the findings you need to make for a use permit. Notice the first one, the proposed use is consistent with the general plan. So that's always something that needs to happen. CEQA. This is an interesting statute. You probably all heard of it. It's the state's version of NEPA. The idea, again, here is that CEQA is about information, okay? It's not about stopping development, which is kind of what it's morphed into in some cases. Really, the idea of CEQA is that decision makers need to know what the foreseeable environmental impacts of their decisions are going to be before they make those decisions. And if there are significant impacts and they can be mitigated, they can be reduced, they're obligated to do that, to reduce those impacts that they find. So it's a very useful statute for ensuring that we've reduced, to the extent we can, significant impacts. There are if you can't reduce them to the level of insignificance, there are ways to still proceed with a project. It is, however, an extremely commonly litigated area of law. And it's often a very easy way to at least slow down projects. So we do our best to ensure that we comply with CEQA to avoid those problems, if at all possible. So this is the CEQA sort of decision tree process. It applies to discretionary actions of a local agency as opposed to ministerial actions where there's no judgment involved, like give me a business license. Okay, if you paid the fee and you're going to do this business, you get the business license. There's no discretion. Discretion means you're exercising some type of judgment. And the first thing you do is you say, okay, well, is this a project under CEQA? And There are statutory reasons why it might not be. There's basically the legislature has said, if you're talking about, a particular, if you're talking about, for example, I don't know, infill within the city where you've already done all the analysis, or if you're just doing a very minor change to an existing location or something, then you don't have to go through all of the CEQA process, because it's just highly unlikely that it's going to be a significant environmental impact. There's also what are called categorical exemptions, which are essentially exemptions that have been promulgated as regulations as opposed to statute. And if there are going to be some significant impacts, you can do a negative declaration, which says that essentially they're actually not going to be that significant. They're not going to be significant enough that it's going to require us to do anything different. A mitigated negative declaration says, okay, we actually could mitigate some of these impacts, so we are going to impose some conditions that will require, for example, the construction has to take place between June and October, so as not to interfere with the bird habitats and the nesting in a different. That would be one thing. It's pretty small, so it's just a mitigated. It is a mitigation measure, but it's so it's a mitigated neg deck. And then if you can't do that, then you have to go through a full environmental impact report, which all of these are. Everything past the exemption part can be pretty costly and time-consuming, and they apply, regardless of. They apply in quite a few situations. Even in a lot of the housing streamlining that they've been trying to do lately, still CEQA applies to all those applications. So, Subdivision Map Act. This is essentially what governs creating new parcels and really new subdivisions. So there's probably not. It does. We've certainly had them. If you have one parcel and you're going to make 4 or more parcels out of that, you have to comply with the MAP Act. Vested rights is an idea basically that's saying that you are able to freeze in time the laws that apply to your particular land use and your development. Because, generally, the city council can change the zoning code at any time. I mean, it'll take them a month or two because they have to have the planning commission look at it, and then there's 2 readings and adoption. But you might have a big developer it's going to take 10 years to get through the process. They want to make sure that the rules that apply to them when they make their application are going to be the rules that apply 10 years down the line, which might not necessarily be the case. So there are ways to try to ensure that one is a development agreement. You can get vested maps, use permits, and then if you do have a permit and you invest a lot of, basically a substantial amount of money, at that point you've vested your rights, which was actually the issue that led to some of the litigation in the cheese factory matter, right? The question there was, had their use permits vested such that they had a right to develop the property subject to those use permits that had been provided. They were issued, I don't remember when, it was back in the early 2000-somethings. Takings. This is again, I mentioned this before, this is when the government takes property for public purpose, which it can. It just has to compensate the individual for the property that was taken. It can apply to certain exactions or overregulation of property without just compensation. Regulatory takings are difficult to enact, but they can occur. And that's when you've got a regulation that has essentially deprived the owner of all economic use of their property. So obviously, rezoning, as long as they're still able to make some economic use of the property, shouldn't be a taking. We've already talked about due process. It requires notice and the opportunity to respond, unbiased decision makers. And really the extent of due process depends on the depends on the right that's at issue. So the more fundamental the right, the more process is due. The practical implications of that are you must make your decision based on the evidence. You have to have the opportunity to respond. So in some cases, that's actually the right of cross-examination. But if it's a really minor interest that's at play, that may not be required. Ex parte contacts, those are contacts outside of the hearing, outside of the public meeting. Those are prohibited unless there's a policy that allows for them, in which case they would need to be reported at the meeting prior to action being taken. You're also not supposed to allow consideration of evidence that wasn't provided in the record of the matter. So you can't rely on something that you read on the internet that no other commissioner had looked at or been given in their agenda packet or by any of the parties to the particular hearing. And it really does invoke that idea of avoiding making a decision before the fact, being unbiased. There's also the Permit Streamlining Act. This is something that staff needs to really be aware of because it determines how long we have to process applications. And one that's now getting quite a bit of play, the Housing Accountability Act. It applies to these types of housing developments that are listed on the slide, and it really does restrict the discretion that the city has to condition or deny these types of housing developments, which is intended to increase the supply of affordable housing throughout the state. And with that, it's not 8 o'clock yet, so my estimation was correct. And yeah, definitely get some cookies. So yeah, so if you guys have any questions, I know it's late. I'll still be here for a few cookies. And if you have any other questions that you guys want to record, we can do that so that other people can get the benefit. Otherwise, I just want to thank you all for volunteering for the city. We really appreciate it. I know there are a lot of challenges that come with it. It's not like volunteering for some nonprofit. Because you do have to file Form 700s and go through sexual harassment training and do all this other stuff. So we really do appreciate the work that you're putting in, and we are cognizant of the limitations and the hurdles that we all need to face as we serve the city of Sonoma. Thanks.
And just so you know, I just sat here and went through and resent, for those of you who haven't filed, I resent those letters on your FPPC that gives you the link. It may say city, it will say, in the letter it'll tell you, this is the email to use to log in. That's your personal email. That is the one you use. The next line in it's a template, but then they automatically use your city email to log the next line in the direction. But it is that personal email that's listed that you use to log in.
But then do I list my personal email again if I put an email in?
No, in the letter.
Okay.
The letter, it tells you this